So, Larry Purcell founded and has directed the Catholic Worker House for troubled teens in Redwood City. For the past 38 years, he's been trying to make sense of everyday life and the Gospels by feeding, clothing, sheltering, and educating the very poor in the name of Christ. While living and working with the poor, Larry has also asked, why are there so many poor in the richest empire in the world? In trying to live the gospel commandment to love one another. Larry has also been repeatedly arrested for protesting against the ultimate weapon of our empire, nuclear weapons. In 1970, Larry was ordained priest of the Diocese of San Francisco. He resigned in 1980, was married in 1984. He and his wife Veronica have 2 grown children who are at college. He has no plans to retire because he loves what he does. What a way to live. Larry.
There's a young woman named Mila. She came to live with us. Mila was 18 years old. She had a long history of cutting herself up, and she knew how to do it properly. You don't do it this way. It's too easy to repair. You do it this way, because then the veins can't be sewn up easily. She came to our house because at age 5, she'd been adopted from a war zone in Europe. In her family in Palo Alto, she lived with them until she was 9. At 9, it was just exploding, the family. She was put in foster care from 9 to 18. She came to the Catholic Worker House when social services cut off her money at age 18. At the Catholic Worker, we live with kids that are at risk. They have massive problems. They're not depressed. They're not a little upset. Most of them are seriously damaged. There's a lot of undiagnosed alcoholism and drug addiction in our kids. They live with us. We simulate a family. There's only 4 or 5 at a time. We try to have 1 adult for every child or every guest. And we try to embody the values of the gospel. No one's paid. No one's charged anything to live there. For 39 years, I've worked because I thought it was important to take my body and break it and share it and give it away free. At the Catholic Worker, we don't take government money. We think the government's the problem. We don't take foundation money unless we're starting a new house. That costs a lot of money. Or in case a kid's going to college, that costs a lot of money. But generally, the way we make money at the Catholic Worker House is the old-fashioned way. We beg for it, and we live like kings. Because we establish this, or try to establish this atmosphere of family, we have things like what's happening right now. Alexandra, another girl, she lived with us. She's now almost 50. She's going to get married. I'm going to walk her down the aisle. I'm doing marriage preparation with she and her fiancé, and in the middle of it, I was telling him, you've got to protect her and get her a house that's paid for. I said, now I'm a little prejudiced because I'm her family. And she burst out crying because she doesn't have family. So we have this house for kids. We try to be a family. The principles of the house are, if you set up a safe and sane place, relatively sane, love works. And I'm here to tell you it's miraculous. In addition to this house for, there'll be time for questions. In addition to this house for teens, the second thing we do is we move towards a major problem in our world, the problem of immigration. I like to think of it as a massive movement of peoples all across the globe. It's threatening life and well-being everywhere. And it's often associated with war. It could be a drug war in Mexico. It could be the war between the very rich and most of the rest of us. It could be the war of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Egypt, Libya, Colombia. it's pretty rampant, war. So these folks, like the Irish and the Italians and the Germans before them, are moving. At the Catholic Worker, we have a language school for Hispanic women. It's free. 60 students, 15 teachers, 4 of whom have PhDs. Everything is free. No one is paid. The budget for the school for the year is $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year. The teachers break the students into groups of 3 or 4 at a time. It's very personal. They play a lot, they laugh a lot, and they learn the Word made flesh. In addition to the school, we have 2 houses for day laborers. Anybody not know what a day laborer is? Guys on the street waiting to be picked up. These guys live in these houses. They put a little money in the pool, and that pays for everything. One place is $150 a month. Pays for food, rent, backpacks, bikes, TV. We have an internet. We have a what do you call it? A lab, computer lab. And each of the computers has Skype. So the guys can see their kids in Honduras or Costa Rica. They go to a coffee shop down there and they set up the time. And they connect with each other and they see kids they haven't seen for 2 or 3, and their wives, 2 or 3 years. So we have the House for Teens. We have the movement with solidarity with immigrants. And then we have a gigantic food and furniture program. In the food program, we pick up fresh food, free, it's given to us, and we bring most of it to St. Anthony's Kitchen, Menlo Park. It's the best meal between San Francisco and San Jose. It's right on the border of Atherton, and at that kitchen they feed about 450 to 550 people 6 days a week. It's fantastic. So that's what we do. Feed, clothe, shelter, educate the very poor in the name of Christ. If you have questions about that, we'll get to it in a minute. More importantly to me, or just as importantly to me, at the same time as we do this work, we ask the question, where is all this poverty coming from? Isn't there enough? Like with the bread. There's always, the only time I ever ran out of hosts when I was going to Mass was in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. There were so many of us, they ran out of hosts. But there usually on a Sunday is enough bread for everybody. I think there's enough bread in this country, enough money in this country for everything. If we just would stop trying to create a war economy. Let me give you an example. I went to a weekend retreat this last weekend. There were approximately 50 of us. I would say of the 50 men and women gathered, they had probably spent 25 to 30 years in prison. These are real serious Christians. A Jesuit priest, 7 years in prison, half of it in solitary confinement for protesting against nuclear weapons. A school teacher, 6 years in prison. Special ed teacher, a grandmother, in prison for protesting at Lockheed. You know, we went to a war in Iraq because we were looking for tubes. Tubes are what carry the military weapons, the nuclear bombs, far enough away so you don't want to kill your whole country. So you got to get it hundreds, thousands of miles away to somebody else's country. We went to war in Iraq looking for tubes. They make these tubes in Sunnyvale at Lockheed Corporation. I've been arrested there many, many, many times. I've gone into Lockheed. I've found the missile for the Trident submarine system in their factory of death. And I've marked it with my own blood with the word death. Well, I went to jail. Paul wrote a number of his epistles. I, Paul, write you from jail. It's very common in the history of the church for Christians to have a price to pay for loving one another. At the Worker House, we feed, clothe, shelter, and educate the poor in the name of Christ. And we say, How can we change this system so that love is the answer? For example, if you're in outer space looking back, it's just a blue star. Pretty good looking, as a matter of fact. No borders. Can we live with a world without borders? Now, at one time, people like us believed in cannibalism. Somehow or other, we moved beyond that, hopefully. Not too long ago, we believed in slavery. It was embedded in our society. We have moved beyond that. We're able to move in the United States right across one state to another, north and south, east and west. Why can't we do that with the whole hemisphere? Who would have thought that England and France, after all the history you guys have read about how they were killing each other, would be allies? Or Japan and the United States? Who would have thought these could be friends? So we can live, it seems to me, or we can dream of living, our children's children, in a world that is just the home called Earth. Or we could live in a world without war. Now, when I say this, a lot of people say to me, you're just not being realistic. I'm telling you, we have overcome bigger kinds of obstacles in the history of upright two-legged creatures. We've come a long way. Now, if we don't control nuclear weapons and global warming, we're not going to have enough time to get where we're dreaming. That's what I believe. Are there any questions so far about anything? Yes?
What made you decide to do this?
Well, I grew up in San Francisco. I'm one of 9 children. I have 7 sisters and a brother. My dad went to this school. 3 of my sisters went to this school. We were very, very, very wealthy. We had maids. I drove a Cadillac limousine, first car I ever drove in my life. All 9 kids went to Catholic grammar school. We were taught in school to love one another. At our home, every night we sat down at the table and we had a feast. And we were taught to love one another. My parents, they were very unusual. They were phenomenally rich, and they got it right, that the only thing that mattered was people. Very devout, our family, Catholics. They practiced rhythm, and they had 9 kids. It works. But they, that was the way it was. So we were taught at home, we were taught in grammar school. All 9 kids went to Catholic high school. My brother and I went to the seminary. My first 3 sisters went to Dominican college, and then the younger ones started going to other colleges, 3 of them here. But my parents paid for all of that and graduate school. And what I was taught throughout my education, and the people I cared about, was that love was the answer. People were the most important thing in the world. What I find is that a lot of people don't agree with that. And certainly the society we live in does not have an economy as if people matter. I can describe that to you. As a priest, I was in a parish. I was in a big parish. I loved it. But I did something that was not a wise career decision. I went to the Archbishop and said, I'm never going to do another thing you tell me to do. That's not a good career move for a priest. And so as a priest, I no longer worked in a parish, and I searched for a way to be with people on a day in and day out basis based on the Gospels. And I tried a whole bunch of things. I would hire myself out at 2 days a week for $200 a month, and I lived on that for 3.5 years until I stumbled in to the Catholic worker. And I liked everything about it except it was working with street alcoholics, and the Catholic workers were as rough as the street guys. And I in my family, we couldn't even say shut up to each other. it was so loving and so gentle and so supportive and so wonderful that I thought, this is the way a Catholic worker house should be. So I moved from San Jose to Redwood City, and I started this house with two of my friends who happened to be nuns, older nuns. And the three of us started it 39 years ago. And eventually, as this thing unfolded, others of my friends, my closest friends in the priesthood, were gone. They were working in parishes, and they just left. And it's very, very difficult to be a priest if you don't have buddies, I think. So at some point, I decided I needed buddies. And I knew that if I looked to Catholic Worker House for buddies, that some of them were women, and that could be a problem. So that's how it happened. I was ordained in 70, I resigned in 80, and I got married in 84, and I've been married 29 years. Does that answer your question? Yeah. I really, I just wrote a newsletter, it's over here. I really don't think the issues that a lot of people want to talk about Catholicism are very important. Married priests, ordaining women, gay marriage. I think for priests that want to be married and be priests, I think it's a very important issue. I think for women that want to get ordained, I think that's a very important issue. I think if I was gay and I wanted to get married, I think that was a very important issue. But if those kinds of issues were the problem, or anything close to the problem, then there are other religious traditions that have been doing that for a long time, and they should be leading this country towards sanity, and they're not. For me, the issue of Christianity today is discipleship. Will you take up your cross and follow me? Will you give up everything and come? You can't worship God and money. Leave your nets. Leave. Come on. To me, the question of discipleship has much more to do with what Jesus asked of his friends than the question of vocation. Priest, nun, married, single, gay, straight. Those are vocation, style, lifestyle questions. Discipleship is a question of how much am I willing to let go of? And one of the things that happens if you resist the system, whether it's the church or whether it's the society we find ourselves in, if you seriously resist it, there are going to be consequences. And the consequences are going to be kind of expensive. In my experience of reading scripture, spiritual leaders, Ignatius, Francis, Dominic, Dorothy Day, Thich Nhat Hanh, anybody who I'd take seriously as a spiritual leader, their strategies are all the same. Gandhi, strip, get rid of stuff, storage units. You know, really, this little old lady at the kitchen that I bring food to, her name was Bridie, she's Irish. One day she comes up to me and she kisses me and she shakes my hand and she slips a check in my hand. And I look at it and it's $5,000. I said, Bridie, you can't afford this. Oh, she says, Larry, the coffin has no pockets. You know, ain't it the truth? You know, I want to read you my favorite piece of scripture, only because I like it. It's the end of John's Gospel. Jesus is dead, but not. He shows up on the shore. They don't know him. They don't recognize him. The one that recognizes him is the one that loved him, John. He said, hey, that's the Lord. Crazy Peter jumps in the water and swims ashore. They see him there cooking. Oh, and he told him to go. He told him, you know, have you caught anything? And they say, no. And he says, well, try it again. Now, that's also what he said to them when he first met them in the other Gospels. They were fishing. Okay, so now what's happened is they've known this guy, didn't quite unfold the way they expected it. So now they're fishing again. They catch nothing. He says, try it again. They get the big haul. Peter swims in. They find him there with a charcoal fire and some fish. Come on and have breakfast. And they recognized him. And then after the meal, this is what happens. And so much of the risen church, of the church after the crucifixion, so much of it happens around the meal. You know, like your families. So much happens when you're breaking bread with each other. After the meal, Jesus said to Peter, Simon, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Feed my lambs. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Second time he said, Simon, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Look after my sheep. He doesn't say become a CPA. He doesn't say get a portfolio. He doesn't say security's a house, although it's nice to have a house. Third time he said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was upset that he asked a third time. Of course, he supposedly betrayed him 3 times. Lord, you know everything, and you know I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. And here's the kicker. I tell you most solemnly, this is Jesus talking, when you were young, you put your own belt on, and you walked wherever you liked. But when you grow old, you'll stretch out your hands, somebody else will put a belt around you, and take you where you'd rather not go. My brothers and sisters, this is the story of discipleship. Take you where you'd rather not go. Now, when I'm giving this talk, I'm not really interested in talking to everybody. Because in a room like this, there might be 1 or 2 of you that are going to be haunted by God your whole life. And you are going to be a little nuts. You are going to do things that other people are going to see you do, and they're going to say, what the hell is the matter with you? And I hope you do. Are there any more questions? Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the Catholic Worker House movement got started?
Yes. The question is how the Catholic worker movement gets started. There was a woman named Dorothy Day. They want to make her a saint now, of all things. And her sidekick was a guy named Peter Morin. Now, Dorothy had been a communist as a young person, hung out with a lot of hippie types, writers. She was a writer. Her dad was a writer. Hard-living woman. Fell in love, had a baby, got an abortion, but was a communist. And at some point, met this second guy, had a baby by him, and was just enamored with giving birth to this baby and wanted her baby to be Catholic. Met a little old nun who taught her Catholicism. It was great. She converts, and she's on fire with the communist notion that an injury to one is an injury to all, that we have to have solidarity. It was a period of time where unions were building. So she had that tradition. She meets this older guy named Peter Morin, French peasant, and he's very, very, very conservative Catholic. I do not mean that disparagingly. By a conservative Catholic, I mean he went right to the sources, the scriptures. He understood the cross. This guy was kind of like a hobo, but a very, very brilliant hobo. Well-read, well-educated, and spent his life living with the poor. So Dorothy Day and Peter Morin hooked up. Somebody introduced him. And he taught her a way to be Catholic that was radical. Love one another. And they started this newspaper called The Catholic Worker. Sold it for a penny a copy. And then one thing led to another, and they had a soup kitchen, and then they started housing people. And it was just, she described it as happened over having a cup of coffee. We'd just be talking, and one thing would lead to another. And that's what happens when you swim among the poor. One thing leads to another. Does that answer your question, or you want more on that?
Do you have one or two little quotes? Because I think he was very clever. Peter Morin's
Peter
quote.
Morin?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can remember them. The world would be better off if people stopped trying to become better off. And the world would be rich if everybody stopped trying to be rich and everybody tried to be the poorest. That's the way. They're called as easy essays.
Easy.
Yeah. Brilliant stuff.
You can get them, you, by the way, can Google Peter Morin or easy essays and get them on.
Yeah. Yeah. There's books, yes.
You talk about the poor in the community and, your early examples that you were talking about. You talked about the girl that cut herself and stuff. But I think if you kind of look in our society, a lot of those people would be treated as if they had a mental illness and that they needed to go to a doctor. But it sounds like your community is working with those kind of people. And where do you kind of draw the line between people in the community that really have a mental illness, and how does that connect to some of the other things?
Did everybody hear this question? Well, we don't do mental care at our house. We have dinner together. We talk. They don't drink coffee, the kids. I drink coffee. I like a cup of coffee in my hand. But let's take Mila as an example. She needed mental care. She needed counseling. No question about it. And she'd been in counseling. But one day at the house, another girl, Tori, who was coming out of a drug program, she was older, 19. We gave her a car. She'd gotten a job. She was doing great. Her story is just a catastrophe prior to us. And she and Mila are going on Whipple Avenue onto 101, or they're coming down 101, and a car coming on Whipple Avenue, Mercedes of all things, sideswipes them. And they do 360s and end up in the fast lane pointing the wrong way, and the car is completely destroyed. I'm on my way to a Giants game with a friend, and I get the cell call, and this little girl is screaming. I don't know what she's saying. Finally, I said, "Did you have a wreck?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Where are you?" She tells me. I said, "Does the car run?" She just said, "Just a minute." I said, "What is the noise in the background?" She said, "That's Mila. She's in a primal scream and she can't stop screaming." This is the little girl that cut herself up, right? Okay. So they get the car off the road. I get there, highway patrol. We get back to the house. We're sitting in the kitchen. And I said to Mila, "Now I got to tell you something. You learned something today that you would not learn in 2 or 3 years of psychology with psychiatrists. You learned today that no matter what your head tells you, your body does not want to die." I'm telling you, she never cut herself up after that. Now, she'd been with us at that point about 4 months, and I would say she had cut herself maybe 6 times. Enough to go to the hospital. I took her once. I was all bloody. She was all bloody. When we got all done, I said, "Now listen, I'm telling you something. I'm never doing this with you again. You want to cut yourself, you want to commit suicide, that's your business. I'm not committing suicide. Until you commit suicide, you're going to school every day, and when you work, you've got to go to work every day." And I said, "If you lose school or work, you're out of this house." So she would cut herself in between work and school. But after that event, that was it. She was still in therapy. But my point is that, yeah, love works. Sometimes kids are so tied up, they need help untying that mess. I don't have a lot of patience for going back and trying to figure out years and years in the past. It's such a dark painful, awful history that it's not going to, in my experience, it's not going to get unraveled. The most important thing is, what are you going to do today? So, does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. It's tricky. Some kids do need a lot of therapy. And if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, I believe in 12-step. I also believe those diseases are hereditary, genetic. That's why the one group that we have a lot of kids of, that's way out of whack, it's not scientific, just experience, adopted kids. A lot of adopted kids. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you envision, I imagine now a parish that I belong to, middle class. What place do you give that parish in the structure that you were talking about? How would it work?
Well, I think it would be great if every parish had a house of hospitality. I think a lot of the religious communities in the past, hospitality was very, very important to their core of who they were, especially the Benedictines, but the Franciscans too. I don't know about the Dominicans. Was hospitality important for the Dominicans?
They were supposed to be on the road.
On the road.
Yeah.
Well, different charisms.
Yeah, they were supposed to be out there.
Yeah. But I think that the early church fathers talked a lot about, if there's wealth and poverty, really the excess of the wealth belongs to the poor. So I think every parish it would be good in every home, have room for those that don't have rooms. I mean, we think it's a great deal that the innkeeper told Joseph and Mary that, go on in the back, you got a garage. I don't even have a garage when we're full. If a teenager calls me up and we're full, and I'm telling them there's no place here, they are screwed. There's nothing. And we could fill 5 or 6 of these houses easily. So there's housing as you all know, housing in this area, if you pay rent or pay a mortgage, it's terrible. Historically, we used to think feudal lords were kind of ripping off the poor serfs by taking some of their property and their produce that they grew on the property. Well, that's what landlords do. They're just called landlords instead of feudal lords. It's terrible. Yes?
What kind of talent or expertise, or maybe none of the above, do people who work in your place or other Catholic worker houses? I assume different Catholic worker houses have different charisms or different missions.
The most important characteristic to be a Catholic worker is enthusiasm. You got to really want to do it. Got to be desperate for a way of life. But you also have to be a healthy person, and you have to be a flexible lover. You can't be rigid in a Catholic worker house and do very well, because you have to deal with supporters, you have to deal with the guests, you have to deal with one another. It's quite an array of people to deal with. And with the kids, the teens I'm talking about, they really they'll test you. So I think enthusiasm and personally being healthy.
When you brought up your own children, did they live at Catholic worker house, or did you
No,
live separate?
we've set up a model. First of all, historically in Catholic worker, Dorothy Day and Peter Morin did not really believe in families at the Catholic worker in New York. If they set up a farm out in the sticks, families could be out there. But they thought it was a mistake to take money donated to the poor and support a family on that. I have a different attitude about Catholic workers. I think that if we're going to be Catholic workers today, some of us are going to be married. Some of us are going to have kids. It's unsafe. There's no question about this, to have a child at the Catholic worker. There's a lot of anger there at times. Dorothy Day had her child, Tamara, at the Catholic worker until she was 8. And then she put her in boarding school, which I think is a lousy choice.
Yeah.
So what we have we have a Catholic worker in San Bruno, a Catholic worker in Half Moon Bay, and a Catholic worker in Redwood City in this area. We have the house where we do our work, and we have a house where the workers raise their kids, close by, for the protection of the kids. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
One of the things we're doing right now, I'm getting older. You know, I can't do what I used to do. But I can still help other young people become Catholic workers. And the way I do that is we try to raise enough money to buy a house. So on our newsletter, at the end of it, we always have our needs, and I ask for toilet paper, shampoo, garbage bags, paper towels, and money or a house, money to buy a house or a house. So we're always, and as a matter of fact, this lady called me up one time. She said, "What's this thing on your newsletter about a house or money to buy a house?" I said, "Oh, some guy told me to put that in there." She said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, over a 10-year period, one time we saved $100,000. And we put it in a checking account because we don't believe in interest-bearing accounts. And it was for a new Catholic worker house. And it wasn't enough. So we had to raise other monies, and we got a total of $170,000, and we opened the house in San Bruno." She said, "Well, how much do you need now to start a new Catholic worker house?" Nobody ever asked me that. I said, "Well, I think $170,000. And this lady says on the phone, "That's in my budget." I said, "What's in your budget?" She said, $170,000. And I thought, I should have said $250. So we got another house that way. These things happen. I don't cause them to happen. They happen. Not very often, but they happen.
Is it easy or difficult to recruit workers in the Catholic worker?
Well, I don't think I'd pose the question that way. I don't think I was recruited, other than by God. And I don't mean that, other than I'm always talking to young people. Like at this thing I went to with the resistors, there were a lot of young people there. I'm talking to them about long-term Catholic worker, being married, having kids, that it's possible to do both. It's a real stretch to do both. Stretch to do either one of them, but to do them together, it's really tough. So I'm always letting people know that I think this is a possibility for them. But Dorothy Day, there's a play about her, and the title of it is Haunted by God. I think this is a good description. God doesn't leave you alone. Little poke, little shove, a call. But if you say, well, did it happen Tuesday? No, I wouldn't say it happened Tuesday. Although I meet people that think it happened on a particular moment or a particular day. That's not my experience. Yes?
Do you have any parishes that are joined to your project in any way?
There's no institutional connection between our Catholic worker houses and local parishes. However, there are Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Redwood City and St. Luke's in Foster City. A lot of people in those parishes are very, very, very good to us. But for whatever reason, we do not have there's not a single parish that helps us regularly on a parish level. We rely on individuals and small groups to support us. That's what we do. Yes?
How many Catholic worker houses are there, say, across the country or around the world?
In this country, there's over 150. Some of them come and go fairly quickly. It's hard to fund them, especially in our area, because a house, We just bought a house in Half Moon Bay for a new family that's there, father and mother and 2 kids. The house was $750,000. That's a lot of money for guys like us to raise. But we pulled it off. In the country, there's about 150. In the world, there might be another 20. In the Bay Area, the San Bruno House has 4 or 5 houses. They do great work. They started in St. Bruno's Church. That's the closest to a church connection they have. They have a shelter for 15 guys at night. And then they fold up the cots and make a kitchen, and they serve breakfast to about 70 men and women in the parish. They found these guys, some of them have been in the bushes of San Bruno for 5-10 years. So Peter, the Catholic worker up there, he opens a little place. We ended up buying a house to do this, where he'd put 1 man in 1 room. And he said, you can stay here as long as you want, as long as you come up with $300 a month. Okay? That was food and board. 2 years later, all 4 or 5 guys that are in this house are still there. At the halfway mark, Peter goes to we decided to buy a house, because if these guys are going to put, $300 a month, we figure we can put a down payment and pay the thing off, and then when we make pay the thing, get rid of it. So he goes up to the 4 guys, each in a room, says, we bought a house over here 2 miles away, and we'd like you to move over there. 2 of them go, well, we like this house. Peter goes, well, I'm not going to be between you and the landlord anymore. I'm not going to do that. They said, well, who's the landlord? So he tells them who the landlord is. So these 2 guys that a couple of years before this were absolutely homeless in the bushes for years, go and talk to the landlord. They recruit 2 other homeless guys, and they stay in this house for another 2 or 3 years, paying every month. We open this other house. It's a model. This thing can be reduplicated everywhere. And we have this other house in South City. So Peter has the San Bruno kitchen and shelter in the church. He's got the house for street guys that are long-term, as long as they can stay in the one place, as long as they pay the money. Then he's got another 30-day house. And finally, he just bought a little 2-bedroom house for a family, homeless family. So that's San Bruno, South City area. In Half Moon Bay, there's a Catholic worker house. There's a couple there that is new, young couple, maybe 28 years old. If I could get a house, I'd say, if you work in this house for 10 years for the poor, I'll give the house to you. That's the deal. We get the money. If we get a house and we get workers that come along, we say, you work here for the poor full-time for 10 years, the house is yours. So there's 2 houses in Half Moon Bay, and there's 4 in Redwood City. And then there's another couple that we've supported with 2 kids down in Guadalupe, which is near Santa Maria. It's a farming village, very poor. Their work is with migrant workers and what are called field workers. Field workers are the guys that work the farms year-round. They do the water systems, they do the planting, they do the weeding, whatever. The migrant workers come in for the harvest. Well, they had 30 families that they were working with that were living in substandard housing, and they all got evicted at the same time. So they brought a class action lawsuit. Took 2 years. Half the families were gone back to Mexico or Honduras or wherever they went. The other 15 families split a $300,000 settlement, which is a fortune for these families. It was just great. I don't know timing where we are.
About 4 minutes.
Okay. Any questions? Anybody? Got anything? I want to tell you a story about resistance, only because I like this story. My dad was a lawyer. The first time I got arrested, I was a newly ordained priest in 1970 for protesting the Vietnam War. And he came to see me in prison. And it was awful. It was not good. But I'm here to tell you that was nothing compared to telling my 8-year-old daughter that I was going to get arrested at dinner on a Sunday night. My wife and I and Celine and Alexander, the kids, are around the table, and I said, Tuesday's tax day, and a group of us are going to go to the IRS office, and we're going to refuse to leave in protest against how our tax dollars are spent on weapons, nuclear weapons. And this little girl looks at me and she says, Daddy, how long are you going to be gone? I said, honey, I can't tell you that. It won't be too long. It might be a few days, it might be 10 days, but it could be a month. The most it could possibly be is 6 months. Probably won't be 6 months. She has a zillion questions. She wanted to know what nuclear bombs were. So, okay, we get through that. The next day I'm driving her to school, and she is agitated. I said, Celine, if you want to tell somebody at school that I'm going to get arrested, you go ahead. Just don't tell them where and when. It's going to be the next day. She says, okay, Dad. She gets out. Next Monday night, we're having dinner. Did you tell anybody? She said, yes, I did. I used it for news of the day. Now I thought, oh, that's great. No problem here. She's got this under control. About 2 years later, she's maybe 10, my son is 8. He doesn't like to sleep in his own room, so they're in a room in twin beds. My wife goes in, rubs her back, talks to him. Then it's my turn to go in, and I tell him stories in the dark of when they were little kids. I run out of stories. I go, we're going to change this. I'm in a rocking chair. I said, this is going to be called the truth chair. And the deal is we can ask each other questions, and no matter what, you cannot lie. But if you don't want to talk about it, you can say, I don't want to talk about it. Nobody can force you to. Fine. After about 4 or 5 nights, I said to them, what's the scariest thing that ever happened to you? And this little girl says, oh, that's easy. The night you told me you were going to jail. Broke my heart. Thank you very much.